Hi, this is Lars Murray from the Unlimited Supply Podcast, the music industry's only daily audio briefing. You're listening to my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast. It's weekly music news for the new music business.
From Clash, AI continues to alarm the music industry, but artists are fighting back.
From Billboard, the Billboard Box Score Mid-Year 2025 report, breaking down the year's biggest tours, venues, and promoters.
And from Mydia, 20 years ago, labels targeted fandom. Will it work the second time around? And all this, and Jay's take on the Taylor Swift news this week. It was a big week for Taylor Swift. So these stories and more when we start the show right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jay, so good to see you on
Good to
a
see
Saturday.
you, my friend.
Yes, indeed. It's a lovely summer day here in Southern California. And of course, that intro was from Lars Murray for Unlimited Supply Podcast. We are a fan of that particular podcast.
Yeah, we sure are. I had a chance to talk with Lars at the Music Biz conference, and I really like his take on the music industry, and I like his podcast, and we had him on at least virtually last week, and hopefully we'll do some more things together. And this week I saw something really interesting on LinkedIn by our friend Drew Thurlow. The headline was, more than 90% of people in music don't understand how copyrights and royalties work. And Drew is a music tech speaker, writer, advisor, just an all-around good guy.
Indeed. And so here are all the royalties a song earns in order of when they began. If you can learn this, you have a real advantage.
Let's listen in.
Hi, I'm Drew Thurlow. Music royalties and copyrights are incredibly complicated, and you certainly would never design a system this way now. But if you understand the history behind it, it starts to make a little bit more sense. The first royalty that was invented is called the mechanical royalty. It's a publishing royalty for the songwriter on the reproduction of a song. It's called that because music was played and reproduced mechanically on player pianos and sheet music. Today, this royalty is collected by the Mechanical Licensing Collective in the United States, and then outside the United States by each country's respective CMO, or collective management organization. The next royalty is also a publishing songwriter royalty. It's called public performance. While technically public performance predated mechanicals, it was memorialized in 1897, but it wasn't actually enforced until ASCAP was founded in 1914. This is a publishing royalty on the performance or broadcast of a song. So today that means anytime you hear a song in a bar or a sports arena or even on a DSP. And these are collected mostly by PROs or public rights organizations. And outside the US, some CMOs also collect public performance royalties. The next two royalties are now recorded royalties, master royalties. These are the royalties on the recording of a song, where the first two were royalties on the writer or publishing of a song. So the first and most important royalty on the recording is called the master royalty. This evolved from the early 1900s when broadcast and recording technology evolved. It's called the master because the first recording devices had two reels. There was a master reel that collected the recorded audio and a slave reel that fed the blank tape. While this language is somewhat problematic today, it's the name that evolved with the technology and it's since stuck. The master royalty is what record labels buy up, collect, license, traffic in, and monetize and exploit. There's a second master royalty called the digital performance. It's not to be confused with the public performance royalty, which is a publishing royalty, but the digital performance royalty, which is actually a master royalty. It's also called neighboring rights because they are neighbors to public performance royalties. Essentially, record labels made dumb deals with radio in the 1930s and 40s to forego any master royalty when songs were played on broadcast radio in exchange for influencing what was played. And then they would clean up when they could promote their music and then sell physical media like vinyl and tapes and then CDs. Well, when digital radio was invented, the industry was in a very different place and they didn't make that same mistake. So a new royalty was invented in 2002 called digital performance. This is non-interactive digital radio master royalties. And most of this is essentially Pandora, SiriusXM, and webcasts. And this is collected by Sound Exchange, an organization founded in 2002 based in DC. And essentially Sound Exchange collects this royalty worldwide. So I hope that cleared everything up. And it's incredibly complicated. If anyone has any questions, you can reach me on LinkedIn. My DMs are open. And my name is Drew Thurlow. Thank you very much.
That's really interesting, and I think he might be generous by saying only 90% don't understand how copyrights and royalties work. However, you and I have talked about this a lot. You know, there, at least in my experience, there is no sort of, you know, when you start with a company, nobody covers this stuff. You know, there's no sort of launching off when you started a company where they explain kind of how the business works in general, what our assets are, all these things. You just have to kind of learn that as you go.
Right.
And I'm not surprised that this is the case. So.
Right. And even just how records are made today, vinyl, CDs, streaming, you know, what that process is. You'd be shocked at how many people in the industry don't understand how things work. But, you know, it gives people like us a job. But a great job here by Drew Thurlow.
That's right. And by the way, it's live, the Your Morning Coffee podcast, a conversation with Oscar Hoagland, co-founder and CEO of Epidemic Sound. If you don't know, Epidemic Sound provides a subscription-based music library for content creators, simplifying licensing and compensating artists through various revenue streams. The company is expanding its role in the music industry.
That's right.
A lovely chat with Oscar.
Yeah, the music from Epidemic Sound is played around 3 billion times every day across various platforms, including YouTube and TikTok. And we had a great talk with Oscar about, you know, some of the recent initiatives and partnerships that they have with, you know, some well-known artists, and then this launch of a new remix program to help emerging artists reach new audiences. So check that out. It's live, a conversation with Oscar Hoagland.
And speaking of live, your Doobie Brothers episode on Behind the Set List podcast is live as well. You and Glenn Peoples are busy guys, and you've got so many happening, but the Doobies, that's a good one. Nice guys.
We've been recording every week and had some really incredible guests. This week, I think we're dropping the Melvins. We recorded an episode a couple of days ago with the Counting Crows leader, Adam Duritz. What an incredible conversation we had with Adam. What a great guy. Very insightful and hilarious. And then this week, we're sitting down with one of my favorites, Lyle Lovett.
Oh, man, that'll be a really interesting one for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. And, of course, We Want the Funk, a new independent Lens documentary titled We Want the Funk, traces the history and influence of funk music, as well as the rise in popularity in Detroit and the nation. And as we always say, we love the documentary.
Yeah, we sure do. You were the one that hit me to this one, and I absolutely loved it. And then my friend Jeff Moscow, I told him about it, and he said, have you seen that Stax documentary, Soulsville, USA? And I did see it. It came out like a year ago, but I rewatched it because it'd been so long since I'd seen it. There's like 4 episodes on HBO. To give you just a little taste, let's listen to the teaser.
I came to Stax Records because of that sound. Isaac Hayes, Sam and Dave, Carla Thomas, Otis Redding.
We were energized, successful. That music was where I wanted to be.
I know a place.
Jim Stewart and his sister Estelle fell in love with black music. Mrs. Axton began to encourage dancing inside. It was an anomaly.
I was working at the record shop. I got to play on some sessions.
Music just brought us together on a real level. There was a feeling, a permission for that magic to happen.
Nobody knew what was happening inside of those doors. If there were blacks and whites making the music together, that could have been a problem.
Ain't nobody worried.
I knew what Stax was.
I know a place.
It was a product of creative and rare people.
Ain't nobody crying.
It just blew me away.
The time that we were living in, it was hard.
You couldn't suppress a person for so long and they would rise up.
It was our realization, the importance of Stax to the black community.
We were reaching another level we had not known existed.
We were on top of the world.
But because of its successes and what it represented, those with the power, they wanted Stax to be erased.
The attitude in the industry was Stax is over. I didn't accept that, though. I couldn't.
It's a good one.
Highly recommended, yeah.
Highly recommended. It is so good. Well, how about some big news this week? Taylor Swift buys back master rights to the first 6 albums from Shamrock Capital. It's a story by Music Business Worldwide, and it popped up on my screen, and I had my jaw dropped. I'm like, wow, good for her.
Yeah. There were a flurry of articles that broke, and I think a lot of these came after I sent the newsletter out. So we'll talk about it a little bit more next week, what it all means. But a friend of mine asked me, what's the benefit of buying those first 6 albums, those original albums? And I sent him a note just saying, look, owning her original masters, that really ensures that her music's legacy remains under her control. That's super important. And it preserves her artistic vision. Plus, she won't need to go through the trouble of re-recording any others, because I had read that she had a little bit of trouble trying to re-record Reputation. Mm-hmm. And it also simplifies clearing potential sync opportunities and opens up the freedom to use that music in documentaries, deluxe editions, anthologies, box sets, etc. And also, it removes potential pressure that, could be felt by the streaming platforms, terrestrial and satellite radio. They may have wanted to play an original version, but didn't want to upset Taylor's camp. So, good move for Taylor Swift. She's got her music back, and
indeed,
congratulations.
And that's called leverage, Jay. I believe that is called leverage, if you want to know for sure. Hey, before we get going on the big stories, Jay, what do you say we thank our sponsors?
Yes, we have a new sponsor this week, and a company that you and I have used for a long, long time, like decades. Yes. And if you're listening to this podcast, you already know about Disc Makers. They make some of the highest quality CDs and DVDs in the country. They also specialize in short-run vinyl with minimum orders of just 100 units. They're also great guys. We use them whenever we need discs for our clients. So Disc Makers has partnered with an exciting new startup, Spinney, S-P-I-N-N-E-Y, Spinney Media. They do warehousing and order fulfillment of physical media, CDs, vinyl, cassettes, and much more. You pay a monthly subscription as low as like $2, and they fulfill your orders, and you pay no pick-pack fees or commissions. They have their own Shopify, Amazon, and eBay stores, and also fulfill your Bandcamp and website orders. It's really cool. It's a needed service for independent labels and artists looking to sell more physical albums without having to stuff envelopes and run to the post office themselves. Really cool. So between Disc Makers and Spinney, you now have a great supply chain solution for end-to-end manufacturing, warehousing, and order fulfillment of physical media. So check out discmakers.com or spinneymedia.com. That's Spinney, S-P-I-N-N-E-Y media.com to learn more.
Indeed. We're also sponsored by the Mechanical Licensing Collective. The MLC is a non-profit organization that's making a big difference for songwriters, music publishers, and other rights holders by transforming how they receive mechanical streaming royalties from services like Spotify and Apple Music in the U.S. Every month, the MLC collects the streaming data and royalties from those platforms, matches the money to the creator who has earned it, and then pays them, or their publishers and administrator partners, the royalties they are due. To date, the MLC has already distributed over $2.5 billion. Yes, $2.5 billion in total royalties, and has nearly 50,000 members worldwide. If you're a songwriter, composer, or lyricist with music streaming, or a publisher or administrator, you need to become a member of the MLC to ensure you're not leaving any money on the table. Best of all, membership is completely free, and the MLC pays out 100% of the royalties it receives. Visit themlc.com to learn more. You gotta love it.
Yeah, and a special thank you to Billboard Pro. We love Billboard Pro. You want to know what everybody in the music business is talking about? Get in the know with Billboard Pro. Billboard is offering Your Morning Coffee readers a special 50% discount off of the price of your subscription. That's easy for you to say. Click on the link in Your Morning Coffee.
Indeed, we are also sponsored by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It is edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
Yeah, I use Bands in Town a lot. Over 90 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist services platform connecting over 650,000 artists with their super fans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
Yes, that is true. And every week, speaking of that being true, I get to hang out with this guy right here, Jay Gilbert. He's a music industry consultant. He is the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups, and a dog person.
I am a dog person. I'm surrounded by them, and I get to do this show every single week with my good friend Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Group, and the guy that I go to when I want to know what is happening with music documentaries and books on the music industry and all of that stuff. I reach out to Mike.
It's a two-way street, let me just tell you that. All right, so let's jump into the stories, Jay.
Yeah, let's jump in. The first one, there was this great report. Well, the headline is Billboard Box Score Mid-Year 2025 Report, breaking down the year's biggest tours, venues, and promoters. And it's a beast of a report, and we could talk about that report for hours and hours, but I just pulled out a couple of charts that I wanted to share with the audience, and I know you found these interesting as well. The first one was top tours by genre. So they take all the tours broken out by comedy, pop, rap, R&B, country, Latin, rock, etc., and they show you, like what are the top tours, and we'll get into some of the top shows in a second. But I some of the stuff is pretty obvious. When you look at things like country, Luke Combs is #1, Jelly Roll is #2, Zach Bryan 3, Post Malone #4, and Kelsey Ballerini #5. That one actually sort of surprised me a little bit, but it's really interesting to take a look here and see who the top acts are on the touring side, because that's where the money's made.
That's where the money is. And I was looking at the comedy section, and #2 is Kevin Hart, and his total grosses were $28 million. And when you think about a comedy tour, you're not bringing in drum sets and all kinds of stuff.
That's a good point. So the profit
got a microphone.
Is probably
completely profitable. It's like, wow.
And it's great that you mentioned Kevin Hart, because I was noticing that was over 61 shows. Mm-hmm. But if you look at Sebastian Maniscalco right above him, he was #1 with half that many shows.
Yes.
So you look at these lists, and you can see this list in Billboard. It's really interesting. And it was the same as, in country. If you look at Luke Combs, who was #1 in country, he made that on 11 shows. #2 was Jelly Roll with that amount was 48 shows.
Yeah, interesting. That is really, really interesting. But the money is just so huge. I mean, you're talking about a lot of money. The Weeknd did 4 shows and grossed $26 million, a little over $26 million. That's good money. That is good money if you can get it.
Yeah, it really is. And on the rock side, I didn't realize that Coldplay was still so hot. And some of the biggest shows of the year. So it was the top 5 in rock: Coldplay, the Eagles, Paul McCartney, Iron Maiden, Pearl Jam. But then, you and I were looking at the top box scores, which is basically the top individual money makers as far as shows go. And 3 of the top 5 were Coldplay. But number 1 and number 2 were Shakira and Bruno Mars. Shakira, I'll add, that was $46.6 million for one show.
Unreal, which the attendance for that show was almost 400,000 people, of course. And Bruno Mars, a little over 400,000 for a $42 million take, more or less, on a single show. And Coldplay, they're playing big shows again, like 300,000, 200,000 people. And again, making, in the 30s or high $20 million range. I mean, that is just a lot of money.
Right. And I was reading that this is the money taken in from ticket sales, but it doesn't include the parking, the merch, and some of those things, which is massive.
Yeah, we're talking big numbers, and it'd be interesting to see, what did Queen make in the day at a single show, or artists, in the big rock acts, but not in the era of giant money like this. I mean, it's staggering, really. So.
Yeah.
All right, another great story from Tom Morgan over at Clash. AI continues to alarm the music industry, but artists are fighting back. Artists, activists, and engineers are creating ingenious tools to protect their work from being exploited by AI systems. I love to hear
this. Was a really great read. It was a long read, and we're just going to put a few paragraphs in here that we want to talk about, and then we'll play you a little audio clip. And again, that was from Tom Morgan from Clash, which I hadn't heard of before, but it was really well done. So he writes that it's a war out there, with the music industry, one of its main front lines on the guerrilla front, a range of ingenious tactics that are being developed to help musicians avoid having their work used to train AI systems without permission. One such tool is Harmony Cloak, and that was created by a team at the University of Tennessee. It's a piece of technology designed to prevent AI from learning musical data.
Right. So Harmony Cloak infuses a composition with sounds that are extremely difficult for the human ear to identify. It was created when the research team discovered that if they integrated low-frequency sounds into a piece of music that was then run through an AI system, it would disrupt the end product to such a degree that the AI-generated output became incoherent and essentially unlistenable.
This reminds me of when you and I were working together at ECAT and eLabs at Universal, and illegal downloads were a big deal, and some of the labels would either put out spoof files or they would take the chorus and replicate it over and over again, so the length of the song was accurate, but it wasn't the full song. And then they did a thing with Madonna, and she jumped on and said, "What the F are you doing?" Things like that. So this article goes on to say that there are a couple of other tools besides Harmony Cloak. There's Glaze and Nightshade, and the companies creating these AI systems are aware of the attempts to fight back against their flagrant abuses. OpenAI, who have admitted it would be impossible to train their models without copyrighted content, have incredibly described the use of these content protection tools like Glaze and Nightshade as abuse. Interestingly, if you Google search the phrase AI industry adversarial attacks, the answer given by Google's own AI overview describes adversarial attacks as, quote, malicious actors manipulating AI systems to make incorrect predictions or decisions that misinterpret input data and make mistakes, potentially leading to a dangerous outcome. Wow. That's like the pot calling the kettle black. It's fair to say that this is a rather one-sided take on the function provided by these tools.
No kidding. Then there's something called Poisonify. There's a great video on YouTube by one of our favorite artist advocates and technology experts, Ben Jordan, titled The Art of Poison Pilling Music Files. Ben describes another adversarial method being used by musicians that he created. A phrase he frequently used succinctly captures the feelings that many musicians and artists hold regarding generative AI tech, terming it a solution without a problem. He's crafted a similar tech to Harmony Cloak he calls Poisonify.
Right, and here's just a really quick clip from Ben Jordan's video. Let's listen in.
Here's a fun social experiment I would like you to participate in. The next time a company announces a generative AI feature or product or service that is for sale or for subscription, ask them the magic 10 words. What data did you use to train your base model? More often than not, those 10 words magically work as a mute button for tech assholes, because they either don't know the answer to the question or answering the question will make them liable for literally billions of dollars in IP infringement damages. That's because they just recklessly scraped Spotify and YouTube and Audible and virtually anywhere that they could find data, whether it was copyrighted or not. And remember how the Recording Industry of America would sue soccer moms because their kids downloaded a few albums? It's just like that, times a few $100 million, and also while raising a few $100 million in venture capital.
So you can watch that video, The Art of Poison Pilling Music Files. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel. It's very informative, very funny, and it begs the question, what's the future of AI music wars? It's obviously very difficult to predict, even the near future. He says, let's conclude with two reasonably positive, in terms of the fight back, stories. One is the lawsuits that Suno and Udio are facing, brought by the big three labels of Sony, Universal, and Warner. And they're seeking damages of $150,000 per work that they allege were used by these platforms.
Right. The exact maths are difficult to work out, however. Jordan estimates the total damages as amounting to over $1 trillion. Then there's the recent comments from the editorial director of Bandcamp, who, in an interview with Forbes, said, "I have not noticed any significant uptick on records that are created with the help of AI." This offers an intriguing possible future in which AI musical slop is confined to streaming platforms and their endless autoplays and opaque algorithmic suggestions. Again, that was Tom Morgan over at clashmusic.com. You can check it out to get the full article, but encouraging and interesting, I would say, Jay.
Yeah, they're fighting back. And again, check out those Ben Jordan videos. They are really good. So the next story, this is from our friend Tatiana Cirisano over at Media. We love her work. We love Media's work. The headline is 20 years ago, labels targeted fandom. Will it work the second time around? The New York Times headline, "The New Deal Banned as Brand," would not look out of place in today's pages. In the article, the writer explores how record labels are responding to the need to diversify revenue streams by seeking to monetize fandom via expanded rights deals.
Right, but this article is not in today's pages. It was actually published in 2007 and centered on so-called 360 deals, a rising new model for development talent, it read, where artists share not just revenue from their album sales, but concert merchandise and other earnings with their label in exchange for more comprehensive career support.
Right. Tatiana goes on to write that these deals emerged at a time when labels were unable to see a path for future recorded music growth. CD sales were tanking, piracy was rampant, and the music streaming, had not really emerged as the industry's savior. Labels had to diversify and fast. Interestingly, labels are in a similar position today, though a far less urgent one. Streaming revenue is not declining, but growth is definitely slowing, and labels are looking to diversify through fandom-focused businesses once again.
Right. This means labels need to share in fandom-related revenue streams. Right on time, expanded rights deals are back in fashion, although no one would dare use the dreaded term 360.
No, they would not. The biggest labels positioning fan monetization as critical to their futures. You know, it's a good time to look back on the past, what happened the last time the music industry went after expanded rights, and what might play out differently now. Tatiana points out 3 key reasons.
Right, and the first reason is leverage. In the 2000s, labels argued that they deserved to see more of the returns from their investment in building artist brands. Much like today, label efforts to market and break new stars often led to those artists securing brand deals and massive tours, but labels did not typically share in those wins. At the time, labels had strong leverage to demand their share. The internet had not yet become a democratizing force for the music distribution, and a record label deal was still a prerequisite to get any kind of major success.
Yeah, and Tatiana continues with, in the years since, artists have steadily gained leverage. Most obviously, they now have a variety of options for building careers outside of a traditional label. But over the last 5 years in particular, labels have also tended to offer deals only after an artist delivers some level of streaming and social media success independently, with the label taking on less risk themselves.
Right. Number 2 is capability. To make their fan monetization dreams a reality, labels may need to take on more risk, working with artists earlier and investing resources in building their fan bases from the start, rather than swooping in to monetize once those bases are already formed. This is a challenge for the publicly traded majors, who are under pressure to show quarterly returns from their fandom monetization strategies.
Right. Hardly time for a 10-year artist and fandom development journey, right? Those challenges notwithstanding, however, the pivot to fandom could be a positive force, incentivizing labels to nurture and develop young talent and focus on helping them grow core supporters rather than passive audiences. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And the number 3 point is alternatives. As streaming revenue began to grow in the 2010s and the panic of the turn of the century abated, expanded rights deals fell to the back burner. With these rights no longer critical deal points, labels turned their attention to terms that would give them a better share of revenue from their real revenue driver, streaming. As a result, we never got to see the expanded rights story properly play out the first time around.
Right. But Tatiana says this time, though, it looks like we might. It's hard to imagine any newer, better business model taking labels' attention away from expanded rights the way streaming did in the 2010s, although, of course, many were just as skeptical of streaming back then. Plus, unlike the total collapse of the CD era, there are still strategies to squeeze new value out of streaming, whether new markets or new tiers.
Right. So Tatiana says, so how is progress going? Expanded rights represented 10% of 2023's recorded music market, with revenues of $3.5 billion. And in Media's updated music forecast report that's out next month, she says we will discover how much this segment grew in 2024.
Yeah, we need to ask them to come on the podcast and break that down for us. Acquiring these rights from artists is one way to do it, but not the only one. It would not be surprising to see more record labels try to acquire or launch management divisions or even agencies, which share in the revenue from things like brand deals, touring, endorsements, and have the muscle to justify it. There's a link to this full article in your morning coffee, and if you're not following Media and Tatiana Cirisano, you should.
Yes, indeed. And finally, our last story, it's from Elizabeth Diltz Marshall over at Billboard. Catalog Gold Rush. 5 things we learned from Citrin Cooperman's valuation experts. And investor demand for music assets hums on. Hip-hop and pop catalogs have the best outlooks for future growth, while music from the 1980s makes bank from streaming.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. And we don't see a lot of articles about these companies that are buying up rights and how they do it and why they do it. And is the market cooling down? Is it heating up? So this Citrin Cooperman, they estimate that a record-setting number of music catalogs with a combined value of around $20 billion were floated to investors last year. While economic and political uncertainty so far in 2025 has sent stocks and global trade on a roller coaster ride, the head of Citrin Cooperman's music and entertainment valuation practice, that's Barry Masarski, he says his team has never been busier.
Right. So Mussorgsky and director Jake DeVries reviewed over 550 music catalogs with combined asset value of $10.7 billion last year, a figure that Mussorgsky says demonstrates very loudly how much volume is in the marketplace. So Mussorgsky and DeVries shared their observations about the current market value being placed on pop and hip-hop music. The average size of catalog they valued in 2025, it's smaller than you might think, and the ongoing popularity of music from the 1980s.
Right, so here are some highlights from their conversation. The first one was hip-hop and pop music catalogs 10 years old or older fetch the highest valuation multiples, a trend that's held steady since 2022. That's hip-hop and pop music catalogs that are 10 years old and older. Some of the biggest hip-hop catalog deals in recent years included Primary Wave's $200 million acquisition of Notorious B.I.G.'s work, Shamrock Holdings' purchase of Dr. Dre's catalog, along with other rights for around $200 million, and Opus Music Group's acquisition of Juice WRLD's catalog for $115 million, and that's according to Billboard estimates.
Right. Those deals aside, the priciest catalogs have been mostly older vintage pop and rock music from artists like Queen, Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, Pink Floyd, and Bob Dylan. While deals like Sony Music's $1.27 billion acquisition of Queen's catalog and naming rights get the most attention, Mussorgsky and DeVries said the average valuation for a catalog they worked on 2024 was $19 million.
That illustrates how much volume there is outside of what garners the most attention, DeVries said. Catalogs that include master recordings and publishing rights, they receive the highest multiples because often those catalogs are also near the end of certain contracts, and the new buyer could have the opportunity to assume administration or ownership of certain other rights.
Right. So let's talk about music from the 1980s performing better on streaming platforms than music from the 70s, 90s, or 2000s. Mussorgsky says an older generation turned to streaming services during that period, and he says, I think they stayed. Adding the popularity of 1980s music has not resulted in lower streaming revenue for music from other decades. It has not crowded out newer music, he said. It's just added more value to the supply of music on streaming.
Interesting. Although Citron's team is not involved in catalog sales directly, the value they give the catalogs is usually close to the price an asset will actually sell for. In other words, despite occasionally eye-popping sums, buyers rarely overpay. Citron's valuations are often commissioned by rights holders for use by commercial banks. That secures financing or other bank services. The banks test Citron's valuations to determine the difference between the revenue an asset actually generated and how much Citron estimated it might generate. Mussorgsky says Citron's estimates always fall within the bank's acceptable range of plus or minus 5%. That's really good.
Wow. Buyers and sellers of catalogs are not showing signs of holding their breath. If there hasn't been catalogs that were resold in 2024, such as Blackstone buying out shareholders of Hipgnosis Song Fund Limited or Opus Group selling their catalog to Litmus, it might be a different story this year, DeVries says. But investor demand is robust, Citron says. Very robust indeed. But those are some eye-popping numbers. But again, sometimes some of them are just kind of like, oh, that seems reasonable. But
yeah, and they said their average was $19 million. We hear the headlines of, it's $500 million, it's $200 million. But there are a lot of catalogs out there, and this was really hot in the news a few years ago, with Hipgnosis sort of leading the charge, with some of these, what were considered at the time, excessive multiples that they paid. And I was sort of surprised that it's still as robust as it is.
Well, and I've talked about this a lot. I think so much of this has to do with just the age of the artist, and you start thinking about, estate planning. And so for a lot of, once you reach a certain age, you become aware, do you want to pass this along to your heirs who do not know anything about the music business? And it's a complex business. And if you acquire an asset, let's say you inherit it from someone, you don't know that business and you don't know how to navigate it and understand what's going on. And so it makes a lot of just again, estate planning, it makes sense to kind of just sell stuff. And so you're just handing over a bunch of money to your heirs. Yeah. So it makes sense. Everybody's kind of getting to that age where, suddenly it's like, what am I going to do with this asset? Do I want to pass it along?
That's right.
Or do I want to sell?
And it doesn't have to be the whole thing. It could be,
No.
I know artists that have sold just a portion of it to, for estate planning, but also to sort of finance where they are now. And some of it might be a little bit of retirement. But it's one of those things that now is predictable revenue because of streaming, that they know that this asset class, and I hate putting it in those terms, is going to generate predictable revenue for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we wrap up the show, if you do enjoy the show, please tell just one friend. Jay and I would certainly appreciate it. And big thanks to Disc Makers, the MLC, Billboard Pro, Hypod, and Bandsintown. We certainly appreciate their participation, helping us put the show all together. And on behalf of my good friend Jay Gilbert, I am Mike Etchart. And I say thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.